I said, I'll talk about science, and I'll talk about how you make discoveries in science. The muse of discovery and the importance of the history of science within that process. Because, especially nowadays, in the latter half of the 20th century, science has become a vocation and a technical subject done by technicians sitting in their offices from 9 to 5. That's not how you do science. Science has a culture, and science is an obsession. If you don't have that obsession, never mind doing science. If you do science to publish papers, you're in the wrong place. I mean, you do science to make discoveries, and the papers are nothing but advertisement sheets for those discoveries, because then you want your colleagues to tell you you're full of shit, you haven't really made a discovery, you thought you did, but here are your mistakes, and you say, oh, thank you, you go on to the next discovery. That's science. Science is not citations, it's not publishing papers, it's not receiving grants, and it's not receiving promotions. Science is only and only making discoveries. But if you make the discoveries, all the rest come anyway. So, science is a way of acquiring knowledge about objects and processes, both external and internal to ourselves, okay, by reasoning beings. I don't want to say human beings, because soon computers are going to start practicing science, and we might even find some intelligence in the universe, okay? And the way science does that, I mean, the way reasoning beings do science, is that they generate testable hypotheses concerning the objects and processes they're interested in, and they test them by observation statements. This testing is what separates science from everything else. I mean, art is a way of seeing. It's expression of hypotheses by the artist about what he or she thinks, feels, whatever. Okay, but it's very subjective. I mean, religion is a hypothesis. It's commonly shared nonsense because it's not tested. Okay, but science is not like that. Science is objective to the extent that it is shared by people who make observations and who can tell each other they got something wrong. If you get something wrong, that means you've come into contact with reality, because the reality showed you they're full of shit. Neither religion nor art can do that. Okay. This definition of science was first proposed by Sir Karl Popper. Okay. The fact that he's called Sir should not mislead you into thinking that he's an Englishman. He's an Austrian. He's a Viennese. But he ran away from the Nazis. He went to New Zealand during the war. And then Friedrich von Hayek, another Austrian who ran to London, hired him in the London School of Economics. And Sir Karl was such an important man. He was not only knighted, he was made a member of the Royal Society, at the same time a member of the British Academy, and then he became a Companion of Honor, which is an exceedingly rare thing even for an Englishman. I mean, Jesus, he was an Austrian. Popper published his idea, his definition of science, that is, it's a system of thought that functions by proposing hypotheses and then testing them mercilessly with observation statements, in this book. He had an earlier paper published only in 2 pages in Erkenntnis in 1933, but this book, although it says 1935, came out in in autumn 1934. Logik der Forschung, means the logic of scientific discovery. It was first translated into English in 1959. And many people agree that it's probably the most important philosophy of science book ever written. At least Einstein said that, Jacques Monod said that, Sir Peter Medawar said that, all the great scientists they were all agreed that Popper finally got the correct definition of science. Einstein said the following. He published a popular collection of essays in 1931 called Mein Weltbild, means my view of the world, or my Weltanschauung. He said, in order to pursue science, you need two things. One, you need to observe, know how to observe. You need to know how to test. You need to know how to make experiments. You need to know how to collect information, how to reach sources, how to use libraries, blah, blah. And he said, all of these things we can teach very well in schools and universities, no problem. But, he said, the more important second aspect of doing science is to make a discovery. Einstein said, there is no way to teach that. He said, somehow, you discover it. Every scientist discovers this for themselves, for herself, for himself, but it has to be a personal attempt. Okay, now, since there is no way to teach this, okay, so where do we get the muse of discovery? Where do we get the inspiration? I mean, since I'm a geologist, I emphasize you can get that in the field. Here's Albert sitting in the field. Actually, he's taken a bath, going swimming in Long Island in New York. Okay, but we geologists look like that sometimes when we're in the field, certainly not in Canada. It's rather cold. I worked in Newfoundland many years ago, and my God, Newfoundland summer was Turkish winter. Okay. Or you can do science in solitary contemplation. You can find the muse of discovery there, or meeting with your peers. Well, these are the US Navy people talking to Einstein. Okay. You can do it in libraries. This is my preferred mode of operation. You can go on expeditions. This is the father's expedition Alberta went. This is on the campus of Caltech in Pasadena, in California. He's riding a bike. Or you can even get inspired by being frivolous. That means all ways to discovery are permitted. You can come up with hypotheses using any excuse you like. To do science, to make it scientific, it has only one condition, that it should be testable by observation, and that it should be internally consistent. But it has to be testable by observation. That's extremely important. So, the question we're asking, when we ask about where we get our inspirations, what is the origin of hypotheses? Well, in 1896, the great American geologist Prof. Carl Gilbert gave an answer to that. He was a United States Geological Survey geologist. If you look at history of geology books nowadays, they'll tell you, James Dwight Dana was the greatest American geologist, which is rubbish. He was a Yale professor, and like most professors, he had a rather limited view of the world. Whereas Prof. Carl Gilbert was a survey geologist. He worked with first with Wheeler Survey, then with Powell Survey, and he was the most versatile of American geologists ever. Up to this day, there is no American geologist to match this man's genius. He was incredible. He worked in every branch of geology with tremendous success. He created new branches of geology. And because in those days, the USGS was in Washington, D.C., and there was a Washington Geological Society. And in 1896, Gilbert was its president. So as president, he had to give a presidential talk. So he chose this topic, the origin of hypotheses. And he approached the question of, what is the initial spark? Where do we get our ideas? And his answer to this question was that it's analogies. That we see something and we say, this is similar to something else, could it be not only analogous but also homologous? Could it have the same function? Could it have the same origin? Well, I mean, this may be complete nonsense, but it's the way to start. So you improve that by questioning your own hypothesis. That means you make deductions from that hypothesis. And every deduction you test. If your test failed, then you say, all right, hypothesis was wrong. Let's go to the next one. Gilbert said, therefore, it was really analogy that helped us. Now, in my own experience, history of geology helped me find analogous cases to those under my consideration in any given time. So while studying solutions suggested to these old problems, I was led to new discoveries. And I will give you a few examples of those. You can say, well, I mean, can't you find your analogues in the current literature? No. Well, you can, but don't forget that the current literature is generated within the same boundary conditions in which you live. So, knowingly or unknowingly, you limit yourself. It is useful now and then to step outside those limits. Go to areas where many people think are unfruitful or have been unfruitful or were wrong, but try them again anyway. You may not necessarily find the answer there, but you might find an inspiration there. Alexander von Humboldt said that it was always a good idea to step back from the dogmatic stance of the present day and retreat to a time of mythology, even in science. He found it very useful, and as you recall, in the second volume of Cosmos, he actually dealt with the mythology as it illuminated science.